Welcome to the Stellar Gaming Dev YouTube channel. My name is Andren and I'm the lead innovation rep and assistant to Stellar Gaming Dev. I was instructed to narrate this video tutorial while Stellar Gaming Dev works on his other YouTube channel, Gen Bop Radio. Today, we'll be looking over implementing Firebase into GDevelop so you can use its features. I was a little hesitant about this because it is not beginner-friendly in my personal opinion and it takes a little work. You need to be familiar and comfortable with different actions and using variables within GDevelop, so if you are fresh to GDevelop this may seem like torture to go through. Firebase is already built within GDevelop so you don't need any extensions, but you will need to have a Firebase account already. If you don't, you will have some crazy problems pop up when you try to do anything with Firebase in GDevelop. To set up an account you need to go to this website. Once you get to the website and are logged into your Gmail account, you'll be able to create a new project. When you create a project, you will need to do three things. 1. Create a name for your project. 2. Determine if you want Google Analytics enabled or not. Ticking it on will allow Firebase to collect a good deal of information about your users. It's up to you at this point to determine if you really want it enabled or not. 3. Provide or create your analytics account if you have it ticked on, accept the terms and conditions, and then press continue. Once you do these things, you will be brought to a page where you can register your app. Your GDevelop game must be registered as a web app. The symbol looks like this. Once you click it and name your project, you can uncheck the Firebase hosting option since GDevelop has no built-in integration to publish to Firebase hosting. When you finish this, Firebase will then show you a code. This part is quite important because a portion of the code must be copied into your GDevelop game properties section. If you don't, you'll have problems and get nasty GDevelop error messages later. The portion you will need to copy is between two curly brackets. It will have your API key and other important information. Take very good care of this information as it is sensitive and no one else should have access to it except you. Once you copy that portion, you can bring it over to GDevelop and place it in the Firebase configuration string section, which is located within the game properties section here. If you keep scrolling down towards the bottom, you will see the specific section. I have already copied the correct format, but the specific details are missing, such as the API key and other information which would be unique to your specific game. This is to give you an idea of what you need to have in GDevelop before you can do anything with the Firebase actions. Your API key and other details must be wrapped in quotes or else it won't work. So once you do all of this, Firebase will be ready to use. Now we can move on to the GDevelop main scene and set up some things, or rather, check out some things, since I've already set them up. So as you can see, I have created a simple login screen with different assets. Here we have the display box, which is a sprite object. The username/email, which is a text input object. The password field, which is also a text input object. The login here message, which is a text object. The error/success message, which is another text object. The login button, which is a regular sprite object. And the register button, which is another sprite object. All of the buttons are normal sprites, but they each have a common behavior. This behavior is called the button color tint tween. What it does is places a shadow on your buttons when you hover over them and also allows them to be pressed. This behavior can turn pretty much any object into a clickable button. It comes in handy for sure. Up here I have placed the text input boxes for the username/email and password fields. You can set the type of text input in its properties easily, depending on what you want. You can also restrict the character count in these input objects, but I can show that part when we go to the event sheet. So I'll take a quick look at some of the global variables I have already set up for this project, but I wanted to show that I added an extra button for logging out to the scene. Now we can take a look at the global variables I have set up. Take note that your specific naming and your specific setup will be unique to you, but I will show the ones I used originally for this. The first variable is for storing the user ID, and it will be a string. The second variable, named registration, is a global boolean, and it is set to false. The third variable is named user logged in, and it is also a global boolean set to false. You don't have to use a boolean variable for the registration or user logged in, but I find it easier, personally. Moving on to the event sheet, you can see I have grouped some things already. The first code block has an at the beginning of the scene condition, and here I hide the status or error message from view, but I will show it depending on the events later. The next set of conditions are in a group I have labeled autologin. This is where the check for the authentication condition is executed. If you use Firebase for any type of authentication, then this condition must always be executed first. This is where it checks if the user is already logged in. If a user were to exit the game without logging out, Firebase would not do it automatically, so the next time they load the game, this will check authentication. In this case, it will automatically log them in with no issues. The next condition will check to see if the email is verified for the user, and if it is, then it will run the actions. This condition can be a subcondition if you want, but you'd have to test how it works with your actions. In this setup, when the account is verified, it will turn the global Boolean user logged in to true. Once this is turned to true, it will persist throughout the entire duration of the game since it is a global variable. I can show you why I used this Boolean later as I move down the event sheet. Once the authentication comes back verified, the username and password input objects are hidden, and typing into them is disabled. The next section is when a user has logged out manually or has never logged in, presses the login button. The Firebase action, sign into an account with email, will check if credentials are correct and will return a status which will then be stored in a scene variable. You can load this variable into a text object to display the result you want. In this case, if it is not verified, it will say invalid email, username, or password. If it does return verified, then it will display the message, success, and set the user logged in global Boolean variable to true. After that, the text input boxes are hidden and disabled to prevent any accidental clicking. The next section is for logging out and the conditions and actions to implement it. It has conditions that check if the user logged in Boolean is true, and if it is, then pressing the log out button will execute all the actions, specifically the Firebase action that logs the user out of Firebase completely. When all of these actions are finished, the global Boolean for user logged in is set to false. After this, it will reveal the text input boxes and enable typing within them again. The next section is for registration. As you know already, registration is for when someone doesn't have an account at all. This will require some additional Firebase actions because you will have to write to Firebase, which in this case would be the user's login details. And in order to do that, you will have to configure the rules in your own Firebase account. Rules are important because they play a key role in the security of your project, meaning they decide who has access and what they have access to. Based on your rules alone, you could restrict users from performing specific actions or even registering. However, if your rules are unsecured, that means anyone would have, read and write access to your things, and trust me, if this happens, you're going to have some really bad problems. So your rules have to be set up in a specific way, based on your own goals, such as this example I did. The first section of these rules allow authenticated users the ability to have read and write access, for example, like saving their username, email, and password so that it can be stored within the Cloud Firestore. This is evident by the line that says, allow read, write. The second allows unauthenticated users to only create an account. Since they are not registered, they can't do anything else. So going back to GDevelop, with the global Boolean variable user logged in set to true, no matter what scene a user would be on, they can't access or do certain things authenticated users could. This is like having an extra layer of security and control for your game. And it will be persistent throughout the entire game until the authenticated user is logged out. With the user logged in Boolean set to false, once the user presses the register button, the global Boolean named register will be set to true. Once that Boolean is set to true, the following block will change the login text to the phrase register here. Since this is just an example, your own project would likely be very different as you would have your own buttons and actions for submitting. In this case, since the registration is set to true and the user logged in is still set to false, something different will happen. In this block, there is a character requirement for entering the username or email and the password. The condition is set so that each field must be 6 characters or more when the register button is pressed. This restriction in the text input is done like this. In the advanced section for conditions, the compare two numbers condition should be selected. In the first expression, the first field will have string length of whatever your input object's name for the username is. In the second field you would select is greater or equal to. And in the third field, which is the expression the first will be compared to, you put the number 6 or whatever number you choose. You would do the same thing for the text input for your password also. You then place the condition, if this button is pressed, within the same block. This means all three of these conditions must be met before any action will take place. If these conditions are met, the create an account action will be performed. The end result, meaning if registration was successful or not, can be stored in a variable and displayed to the user through a text object. If successful, the text that is within the username and password input fields will then be registered within your Firebase account as a new user, and they will get a specific unique ID that you can see, along with their email address. The subconditions below this will send a verification email to the email address the user placed in the text input, then it will log them out, change both text input fields back blank, then turn register here into sign in before finally setting the global boolean for registration back to false. The last two blocks are the overall limit for the username and password input fields, which is set to 31 characters for each. This means that if 31 characters are reached, you can perform actions that will set the input fields back to blank and alert the user of the character limit. After registration, before the user can actually sign in, they will have to verify their email. Once the email has been verified, the user will be able to log in. Let's take a look at one of the games I was working on a while back to show how it works with a mock account. In this game, I created a spare email account, and here I'm going to attempt to log in without a password and get an error message. Next, I will press the sign up button and then it will change things to register. The next example, I will put in the correct mock email address but the wrong password. For this, I will put in the correct password and it will verify it and I am allowed to log in. Now for this, I will log out, then log in again, but don't log out of the game completely. If I exit the game and start it back up again, it will log me in automatically. Finally, to finish everything, I will press the exit button and exit the game completely. And that's it. This concludes the GDevelop and Firebase tutorial, the basics. The next tutorial will be about using read and write functions to create user information and retrieve data from Cloud Firestore to load into your game. So it will be GDevelop and Firebase tutorial write and retrieve data from Cloud Firestore. Posted below in the description is a simple template based on what I showed in this video that you can play around with. It has the variables, the objects, and the event sheet structure I showed earlier. Do not forget, in order to use Firebase in GDevelop, you must have an actual Firebase account, a registered game, and setup authentication. I didn't mention the last part at the beginning of the video, but it can be done by going here. This is how you will choose how users will be able to log in. I'd stick to email/password if you're new to this, as it's easier. If you found this video useful or it gave you some new ideas for your own games, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.